Hello, and thank you, Councillor Alvantejo from Mississauga, for coming on today to talk about an interesting post I saw you made on social media that Mississauga City Council voted not to fund the remaining $450 million for the proposed Peter Gilgan hospital redevelopment. Uh, Wondering if you can just come on and just I'm sure for those of our listeners who are in Mississauga, they know what we're talking about. Can you maybe just enlighten those of us who are outside of Mississauga exactly what the issue in front of City Council was, and then we'll dive in more into it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on again. Always happy to be chatting with you guys. The issue is a good news story. The city of Mississauga, one of the largest cities in Canada, third largest in Ontario, we are building the largest hospital across Canada. Anywhere in Canada, we are building the new Mississauga Hospital. It'll be the largest one. It'll also have lots of specialty pieces, such as a women's and children's hospital, cancer center. It's going to be a phenomenal institution for our city, and it's desperately needed. We absolutely need more healthcare access. Emergency wait times in the city are not great. So this increase in capacity and this new hospital is very welcome by any leader in Mississauga, but also all residents. The province announced this quite a while ago. There have been, details to work out. Some demolition started earlier this year, and really we're getting into the details of actually starting to construct the building and the costs of it. The costs of this building are enormous. They're estimated between, 15 plus billion dollars. And the issue that City Council was faced with was that most hospital projects in Ontario have what they call a local share, where the province will fund 90%, and then they'll ask the hospital, the institution, to come up with the other 10%. Now, the hospital can raise that additional 10% any way they want. They do it through parking fees, they do it through their own fundraising, and in some cases, they go out and they ask local taxpayers of the municipality that they're serving to contribute some as well. This happens sometimes often. It depends on the size and scope of the project and of the municipality involved. They asked Mississauga, the city, the corporation of the city of Mississauga, to contribute $450 million for their $1.5 billion local share. The city considered that and figured out how we would pay for that. To come up with $450 million on property taxes would be an increase in property taxes for the next several years, plus taking out a considerable loan and indebting the city for another decade and a half. This was basically not palpable for Mississauga City Council. We're obviously in an affordability crisis, but it's also about fairness, right? And one of the biggest things that we were comparing to is the inconsistency of this sort of local share policy, right? Institutions, hospitals can kind of raise this how they want. And some municipalities voluntarily, maybe to try and attract the hospital investment, go out and levy a fee on their residents for a few years to try and raise some money. This is the largest ask anyone has ever made of any municipality. On top of that, Mississauga being the third largest city in Canada, we are next to the largest city in Canada in Toronto. Toronto has never paid anything to a hospital in terms of their local contribution or their local share. So we, wanted to be fair and sort of say this doesn't seem to, in our opinion, be a fee that we feel should be levied on Mississauga taxpayers.
Now, in the history of kind of hospital expansion, it might, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to it's kind of been common practice that these new expansions or new hospital builds are kind of a three financial sourced operation. You have the province chipping in a chunk of change, the hospital itself through their various foundations raise money, and then typically the municipality chips in money as well. And it's all agreed to as terms like what share is whatnot. That's kind of been the standard practice. I'm going to say going back 10 to at least 10 years. possibly more. This changes. You're basically kind of breaking the tradition here of saying no, the city is not going to be funding the hospital that's staying that is part of Mississauga. Um, I'm wondering, how do you approach that kind of change of precedent? Because that's what people are going to come back like. This is how we build hospitals. The city, the hospitals meant to benefit the city. The city should chip in and be a contributing partner.
Yeah, a couple things there, Joel. I mean, this precedent was broken, I think, 10, 15 years ago when Burlington offered to pay some of the local share that the hospital was trying to fundraise. Before that, municipalities had never contributed to the local share. It was always done through the hospitals themselves, through the foundation, to get that 10% of the local share, and the other 90% was covered by the province. That's how we had built hospitals up until that point. And every project since then has started looking more and more towards municipalities to cover the rest of that. Now, not all of them did. Not all of them have requested that municipalities contribute a local share. And when they contribute the local share, it's been very inconsistent. Sometimes it's a third of it, sometimes it's half of it, sometimes it's 10%, 15%. So there's no formula, there's no standard procedure where you can say that the, standard operating procedure is that a municipality should contribute 50% or a third of the local share that the hospital is expected to find. And so this one inconsistency exists, but two, it does not apply evenly to all municipalities. The city of Toronto is explicitly exempt in legislation from having to contribute to a local share of a hospital. Now, it doesn't ask and specifically say that municipalities shall contribute to a local hospital, is that they can if they see value in the project and then that they want to contribute and they use the tax base in order to do that. One of the things that I've been and we've been at the city pointing out is that this is a regional hospital. This hospital is estimated to serve 1.7, 1.8 million people. Mississauga is 750, 800,000 people. There's an extra million people here who are going to benefit from this hospital as a regional center. They're not being asked to contribute to this either. The same way that City of Toronto hospitals, are regional hospitals and take in people from all across the province, and they're specialty hospitals as well. We don't ask the City of Toronto taxpayers to share any of that burden. And in fact, what's even more complicated with this particular scenario is that Trillium Health Partners, who runs the Mississauga Hospital, the Credit Valley Hospital, and Queensway, is that the Queensway Hospital expansion just happened and is still in progress. And that's part of this system. Yet because it is just across the border in Etobicoke, there's no local share asked of the local municipality.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually I wasn't aware until you just mentioned it that Burlington was the first to do this. I mean, I was aware that Burlington had done this, and yeah, I mean, my recollection is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a lot more than the 10%. It was more like a sort of 30-30-30 split between government, municipality, and fundraising, basically fundraising from people who wish to donate, from some major private donors and things like that. Those numbers could be way out, but that's my rough recollection. And it's going to be difficult for me to ask sort of tough searching questions on this because I'm on the record a while back. This subject came up and saying like it's absolutely wrong that municipalities are being asked to pay for provincial responsibility. It just is. The province, their job is healthcare. They raise taxes to pay for healthcare. If Mississauga needs a hospital, it's the province's job to pay for it. It's not. That's not actually the job of charitable contributions, in my opinion, either. But I know that's probably not a popular opinion. But if the need is there, then the province should pay. And I mean, maybe you could speak about. Again, it's kind of a leading question. I'm trying not to do that, but if the province doesn't pay, what does that mean for taxpayers? I mean, in essence, it's either coming from one taxpayer's pocket or another taxpayer's pocket. What difference does it make to the taxpayer, and why do you think the province wants to do it this way?
Yeah, I mean, leading question or not, I support the idea because I mean, I would argue that 100% of healthcare should be paid for by the province. The provincial government is responsible for delivering healthcare. They've actually received, I believe, 200 and plus billion dollars more in federal transfers over the last 10 years in healthcare, and yet have only increased healthcare spending by over 100 billion. There's a discrepancy there where they haven't transferred all the money that they're getting from the feds for healthcare. There is, at the end of the day, like you said, only one taxpayer. The province of Ontario has a much larger tax base and has much more diverse options in terms of raising taxes to pay for certain things like healthcare. Municipalities are among the least governments that are able to tax anyone. And generally speaking, it's for direct services, right? We have a very, very almost transactional relationship with our taxpayers, where we take your property tax dollars, we service your roads, we collect your garbage, we pay for your pipes, and that's kind of how it works. To use the property tax system like this for something that is solely the province's responsibility, I agree, I think is inappropriate. I would rather they fund 100% of healthcare expenses when it comes to building the building and operating the building, and then the fundraising goes to enhancements that you want to do to the space, to get more equipment or whatever it is that the foundation wants to fundraise for, but not for the capital and the equipment that is required to actually deliver healthcare.
Are you
Eh,
worried? I was just going to ask, kind of follow up is, are you worried about getting pushback from the province? Because let's be honest, this provincial government is very, I want to say stingy, but in recent news, that's not so much the case. I mean, they're giving away $3.2 billion in checks to Ontarians coming new year. But I'm still anticipating that they're going to come back and start pushing back, saying, no, Mississauga, pony up that 450 million, or else you don't get a new hospital. Are you worried that you're going to start hearing that from the Ford government?
We already have. We got a letter from the Minister of Health just yesterday,
Okay.
where she sent an email, a letter to council saying, this is about fairness, that we've invested $50 billion in healthcare across Ontario. Other municipalities are paying their fair share. You should do so as well. And in which my immediate response is, it's not. It is not fair already, where a system that is not regulated by the province, where any municipality can contribute any amount from zero to all of the local share, and that Toronto explicitly is exempt,
Mhm.
the largest municipality in the province. So that doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't make sense to me. We are getting that pushback already, just sort of saying, you need to contribute this. I don't want to put the hospital in the middle of it, and that's kind of the tricky part here, is that we are supportive of the hospital. We are doing a lot as it is to help them accelerate their building, to make sure they're getting their permits, to making sure that we're building the transit system that's going to support it and the housing that's going to be in the neighborhood. But this specific financial contribution is just not in the cards for Mississauga taxpayers.
And what's the I mean, nobody want. I think everybody's pro hospital in Mississauga and the province. Everybody wants to see this project built. But again, this clearly the province wants, for whatever reason, you guys pay the $450 million, and they are notorious for just being stuck in the muds when it comes to not spending money on healthcare. Uh, are you at all worried that this redevelopment is just going to get bogged down in who covers whatever the price tag this $450 million is going to cover, that part, walls aren't going to be painted, or the roof isn't going to be put on the hospital because the check hasn't been signed yet? Are you worried that we're just going to see basically, are you worried that the province is playing chicken with the city on this?
They might be, and we'll see where they take it, because I'm sure they like the idea of contrasting, the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party's former city, and where our position is on taxes. But this is a provincial government that also likes to talk about no new taxes. So and not having raised
Mhm.
any taxes since they've been in power for the last 6 years. But this, in essence, is raising a tax just through a different means, right? So I kind of want to push back politely to sort of say, you're claiming not to have raised taxes, but your actions are causing us to raise taxes, right? We can't contribute to this. They've seen the books. They did the audit. They know we don't have $450 million lying around and that we would have to raise property taxes significantly over the next several years and incur debt. We don't have revenue generating powers the way they do. And again, this is something that's supposed to serve the broader region, not just the city of Mississauga. If they're going to play chicken with us, we're more than willing to go to the edge here to sort of say we don't plan on breaking on this when we know there's other things that our residents want us to focus on doing, and that's doing the business of what a municipality is supposed to do, which does not include healthcare.
There is a well, I mean, just sort of, I think it's worth sort of emphasizing a point that you made there even more strongly, and that is that hospitals, I mean, everybody kind of knows what's happening. I mean, again, using Burlington as an example of that's not Mississauga, just for convenience. If you live in Burlington, then you may go to Joe Brant for your treatment. You may go to Oakville for your treatment. You may go to Mississauga or Toronto or very likely Hamilton for all kinds of treatment. It seems to me absolutely unfair that the municipal taxpayers in Mississauga should basically subsidize something that is a regional benefit. And sure, people in Mississauga are going to use it more than other people, but then the municipal taxes don't come from everybody. They come from homeowners. They don't come from businesses. That's what the HST is for, or the old PST. And they don't come from people who rent. So there's within a municipality, there are a huge number of people who don't actually pay, at least directly, into that pot. So you're kind of really hitting homeowners particularly hard. Now, maybe they're the sector of society who can afford it best, but still, it seems kind of unfair that the whole idea of taxes, we share the cost for the common good. And that's really the principle that's kind of being thrown out here. And it's hiding taxes, isn't it, really? I think, I mean, it's the government. And I think it's worth pointing out here, Councillor Tedgy used to be a prominent Liberal. Joel and I were much less prominent, low-level functionaries within the party. The Liberal Party did this too. I mean, in fact, Burlington obviously is probably a good example of that. But do you think the horse is already bolted, or do you think, do you really think you can get away with this, or is it more that Mississauga is itself trying to bargain here and say, okay, well, no, we're not going to pay $500 million, but come back and we'll pay $1/5 billion, or I don't know.
I mean, that's certainly possible. We are going into a budget cycle. We are still negotiating around regional dissolution, downloading. At the end of the day, there's again one taxpayer, and it's all about how we best manage their funds and making sure things are as equitable as possible. If the province wants to take a position that municipalities in general should be contributing to healthcare, then they should say that, and then they should make it consistent. They should make every municipality, all 444 municipalities, including Toronto, and say, thou shall contribute 5% to every hospital project from here on forth. They are not saying that, right? And so that's why you have cases where in Burlington they're paying for a third of it, of the local share, and then you have us asking for a third of the local share, and other places are asking for half, and in other places do zero. That's inconsistent. That's not fair. That doesn't make any sense to me.
And the number in Mississauga is 10%, is it? As the number you said at the outset.
So it's 10% is the local share, and then of the local share, we're being asked to contribute about a third.
Okay. I mean, I guess that the obvious kind of comeback, as Joel has already mentioned, is that the province sort of says, okay, well, if you're not going to play with us, then no hospital. Do you think? I mean, to what extent do you think you will then be on the hook for that decision? I mean, and how in terms of a council decision, I mean, was this a decision that the entire council was behind, or is it just a sort of a majority of you, or, but there's a significant discrepancy of opinion?
No. I mean, council was unanimous on
Mm.
this. We had quite a few discussions in the lead up to the vote. There were good questions asked, honest questions around, how could we make this work? Are there other ways to make this work? We wanted to do our due diligence. We weren't outright just sort of dismissive and saying absolutely not. But when the sheer number, when you think about $450 million, like that's a lot of money. And it wasn't just one increase to the property tax base. It was multiple increases over multiple years, and it would carry forth a large debt that we would have to pay off as well. So it wasn't just 450, it was actually going to be much greater than that in terms of interest charges over the years. So, learning more of the details made it easier for everyone to say, not that we don't support the hospital, but we do not support supporting the hospital in this way that requires us to raise taxes for this amount of time, solely for this purpose, where it's not required legislatively speaking. And it has been a precedent only for 10 plus years, and that we don't think this is the right thing to do.
Uh, on the notion of raising taxes, in your post, I believe you mentioned that City Council, Mississauga City Council, is raising property taxes 2.66% to cover operating costs for the city. This is, of course, because of the notorious ending of development charges by the Ford government, which has forced municipalities, not just Mississauga, but across the province, really just look at how do we cover operating shortfalls. I think I don't want to step back, kind of bring up the broader question of like how cities fund yourselves, and that before, development charges were kind of a bread and butter or a big chunk of how cities operated in terms of making sure that buses operated, sewage, toilets flushed, lights, street lights went on, all that stuff. Um, Ford did away with that, and you guys are kind of left cleaning up the mess and figure out, well, okay, we're going to have to raise property taxes because that's the only vehicle you have. Here in Burlington, they're raising property taxes 4.75%. I'm wondering, in your opinion, what's the fairness here? Then they come back to a municipality and say, not only are you forced to raise property taxes just to keep the lights on, literally the lights on, but now to pay for this, what's our responsibility, meaning the provinces. What's your viewpoint on the fairness of that to kind of say, well, that you have to add on this added responsibility on top of what is legislated to you as a municipality?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's fair at all. This government likes to talk about not raising taxes, but what they've done is they've downloaded more responsibilities and more burdens onto municipalities. Now they pay for some of that, but they don't pay for all of that. They actually did repeal and walk back some of the development charge clawbacks that they were planning. It's not going to be as severe as was initially announced. And part of that was because a city like Mississauga, we pushed back really hard. Now we had a different mayor back then, and it turned more political than I think some people expected it to be. But we sent out letters to every single resident, every single homeowner that said, your property taxes are going to go up because of this government's decision to do the following. And we're very willing to do that again, right? To sort of say, we don't want to raise your taxes, right? We want to be able to manage this within the confines of our budget. And we haven't actually passed that budget yet. That 2.7% increase is still subject to council approval. It's just the first proposal. And that doesn't include the regional increase that could come as
Mhm.
well. So, I was running in the last mayoral election as somebody who wanted to freeze property taxes for the next couple of years for the purpose of the fact that we don't have many tools to help people with their affordability, right? And like you said, property taxes are exclusively almost one of the only tools that we have at our disposal to raise revenue, but also to help people with affordability of the city. This city is a very expensive city, one of the most expensive cities to live in, and raising property taxes makes it worse. So we need to build more housing. We need to do so much more to help that. That's only one of the tools we have. But again, it's an inequity that I see for municipalities in general, that one of their only tools that they have are property taxes. Now, the city of Toronto, interestingly enough, this keeps coming up. It's not one of those things where I'm just saying, oh, Toronto gets this, why don't we get that? But Mississauga is the size of Toronto was, decades ago, right? We're well past the point where we should be governed by different rules than a large urban municipality. And the city of Toronto has its own act where they have their own special tools to raise revenue, introduce new taxes. It's up to them to choose whether or not they want to use it. But we don't have that option, right? They can create tolls if they want to. Now, sometimes the province comes in and says no, the same way that, they're saying no on bike lanes. Um, but we should be on the same playing field, right? Where we can generate revenue in other ways. If you want to talk about something that's more equitable, you could introduce a sales tax. And you see that in the US all the time. Different cities have different sales taxes. And that's something that everyone who visits the city, not just the people who own property, then contribute to, right? There are other user fees. There are other ways of generating revenue that aren't just on the municipal property tax base, which could be more equitable. Now, the province could also properly fund other things like social services that don't require the municipality to then top up as
Well,
well,
that's
which also makes a big difference.
I think that that invites the larger discussion of taxation, and that you know I I want to kind of take the government side for a second here, and be like, okay, but let's be honest here. Come bring back to the hospital in question. The majority of people who use this hospital will be Mississaugans. Yeah, okay, folks in Brampton, Peel region will come down to use it, but primarily it's a Mississauga hospital. Shouldn't there be some onus on the city to contribute something to that, to build it, to it's going to employ Mississaugans. It's going to be built probably by a good chunk of Mississaugans, etc. Which case then could be pushed back to the city to say, fine, if you want us to chip into this, we need to talk about new ways for us to fund ourselves so that we can alleviate the taxation burden on Mississaugans, Peel region residents, if we want to go that far. Is that a discussion that maybe we should be having? Is that, listen, if this is the model that we're going to be going forward, not just for Mississauga, every municipality in the 905 in Ontario, that we need to start talking seriously about how our municipalities fundraise, the legislative powers that they have, and how if this is going to be a responsibility to really look at this seriously and stop kind of using this as a pass the buck opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we're not just dogmatic about the fact that we shouldn't be contributing to this at all. We think in principle we shouldn't be, but that, we're open to discussion. If there's a negotiation to be had where we're talking about additional revenue tools for municipalities, and then, that's how they're going to justify, making us do this, then let's have that conversation. I want to have that conversation anyway. We've been trying to, the province, whether it's liberal or conservative, haven't been, super keen on that in the past, of sort of changing how cities are funded. And so you'll see organizations like the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus advocating for, a new deal for cities. The system is kind of broken in terms of how they're funded. But also, if you're talking about the broader problems that municipalities have, especially when it comes to approving housing, that is also broken, right? Because you're looking at people getting elected specifically to, potentially stop development, then being asked to approve development, right? And that's just a tricky thing to do. When it comes to how cities are funded, it hasn't worked this way. It shouldn't work this way, and it doesn't work this way in other municipalities around the world. We hope they would be open to exploring new ways to do that.
I mean, there's you used a phrase that I was just about to use it in my next question, which was a new deal for municipalities. And this is, really, if there's a single sort of unifying theme that the we've seen doing this podcast week after week, it's that the current deal is broken in so many different ways, in terms of funding, in terms of powers, in terms of kind of being at the whim of the province, changing its mind in almost sort of arbitrary ways. And unfortunately, that goes back to the constitution and all kinds of things which are really tricky to change. But when you talk to municipal politicians, everybody agrees. Right until they become provincial politicians, and then they never talk about it ever again, and vice versa. People who've never talked about it when they were provincial suddenly become passionate defenders of municipal autonomy when they're elected to municipal government. It's really frustrating. How do we get this onto the provincial agenda? Because I mean, I look at what's coming from the opposition parties, and let's face it, it's going to have to be the opposition parties that it comes from. And former mayor of Mississauga is the leader of the one certainly that Doug feels is the biggest threat. And I don't see any kind of significant policy discussions or proposals or strong messaging about any of this. And yet I feel from my own sort of experience, again, coming back to Burlington, but also looking at Hamilton, places like that municipal politics can really get people fired up, because people do feel that there's an injustice right now when they have no control over what's being built, when the appeals tribunals sort of overrule whatever they've voted for, when the council makes decisions and the Minister of Municipal Affairs just throws it in the garbage. You can get people fired up about this if you try, but no one in the provincial discussion ever seems to try. Very long question with lots of separate points as usual. I don't know, how do we get this onto the agenda that people will actually pay attention to?
Yeah. I mean, some really interesting things that you raised there. You look at the mayor of Hamilton, it's Andrea Horvath, former leader of the NDP. You have Stephen Del Duca as the mayor of Vaughan, former leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, and now you have the former mayor of Mississauga as the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. It's not that there isn't a lot of crossover. The premier himself was a city councillor who ran for mayor of Toronto, right? And who I think a lot of people say still wants to be mayor of Toronto with the way he governs the province and sort of makes policy for Toronto, but makes it apply to the rest of the province. Um, and so it already is part of it, but we haven't ever asked our provincial politicians, to your point, how they would govern municipalities better, right? And we need to ask that. We need to know what their plans are for municipalities, and then we need to follow through, right? Bonnie has said that she wants to create a new deal for cities. She hasn't come up with a platform on it yet, but presumably in the next election she will. And then maybe, hopefully, that'll spark the other leaders to sort of say how they would better govern municipalities and how they would oversee them. The problem is that we don't have constitutional rights to exist really as municipalities. We're completely creatures of the province, as we like to say, but that means that the province can do almost anything it wants to municipalities.
Yeah, it really I feel it puts councillors and councillors and mayors in a really invidious position. It's all responsibility, and so the perception is that you're the guys making the decision, and yet so often you're not. Either I know there's the strong mayor powers, etc., which is a whole other issue, but in essence, the traditional way in which the municipalities work is in any case, policies coming from staff, not not coming from the politicians per se. But also that then whatever decision is made there can just literally be kind of almost just with a stroke of a pen thrown away by the province. And I feel that's very unfair to people who have been elected. You shouldn't be elected to a position and then not actually have the power that people think you have. I mean, it's just wrong. And it's kind of a confidence trick on the electorate, to be honest. Again, in a statement with no question, I really have to get better at this after 3 years of asking these questions. do you think that something we've talked about, and I know there's been some attempt to do this, that there's a possibility of the municipalities doing a much better job of kind of ganging up together in essence to use their collective muscle against the province. I know there's the AMO and the big city mayors and et cetera, but um, historically they may write strongly worded letters, but that's not quite the same as actually exerting real influence. Do you think there's scope for that becoming much more a part of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. The opportunity is there. Whether or not local politicians will take it is the question. When Mississauga came out against Bill 23, which clawed back all the development charges we were talking about a minute ago, we were kind of the only ones to stick our neck out that far. And you could say that part of it was because it was Bonnie, and then it got a lot of attention. But then the Ontario Big City Mayors, I was acting mayor for a couple of months when Bonnie was running for leader, and I got to sit around that table. They kind of recoiled at that because they need to be perceived as a neutral player, regardless of the stripe of the provincial government, and willing to play with whoever is there. And so the mandate to now Mayor Mead Ward, who's the chair of the Ontario Big City Mayors, is to try and find a way to get along, as opposed to being antagonistic. Now, I think there are ways to sort of point out, and she's done a good job of this, to sort of say that this isn't a fair deal for cities, and we still need one. So there's kind of a balancing act there. One of the interesting things that I'm reminded of is former Mayor Hazel McCallion used to say um, uh, that the federal government has all the money, the provincial government has all the power, and municipalities have all the problems. And everybody expects municipalities to be able to fix all the problems, but they neither have the tools and the resources to do that without the support of the other orders of government. Now, you're starting to see the federal government, depending on your opinion, interfere more with municipal government. And they, through their housing accelerator funding, have gotten more in the weeds of how municipalities can operate and the policies that they have for approving housing, fourplexes, for example. I put in motion after talking to the Minister of Housing, Minister Fraser, who said we need to see a fourplex legal as of right in the city of Mississauga before you get your $125 million worth of funding. And I got that motion in. Eventually, it got passed after the mayor had to use her strong mayor powers. But that's something that the province wasn't willing to do. And the premier still today says that he does not want to see fourplexes in Ontario. So, being in this sort of weird creatures of the province middle ground, but also being able to get funding directly from the federal government, who thinks that, you're not necessarily doing all the things you can do. Here's another way around it, is going to continue to be a strange way to run government.
I'm just looking at our time. I think we're coming up on our allotted time. I do want to finish off with one question, bring it back to the matter of the hospital at hand. What are the next steps that the city of Mississauga will be taking on this file? What's the next phase that I guess Mississaugans and those in Peel region can expect to see happen on the development of the Peter Gilgan redevelopment?
So we expect that the Trillium Health Partners will continue pushing forward, and will come up with a new plan to try and raise its local share, 10% of the project, $1.5 billion, and absorb the additional costs of the $450 million that the city is not going to be contributing. Now, they can come back and re-petition the city at the next budget cycle. But we've said no. We've passed a motion that we're not going to be doing that this time around. If there are other avenues where they're trying to negotiate with the province to give us new revenue tools or find new ways to legislate that, they can do that. We want to work with them in terms of how they're going to get this building built. That's outside the realm of financing it directly. That's basically where we are as a municipality. We've agreed that we're not going to do this. And we're saying it's because it's a provincial responsibility and we shouldn't be asked to do that, and that the rules should be consistent for municipalities across Ontario, and it's not. So that's kind of where it is right now, and we're going to leave it at that until either the province or the hospital comes back with an alternative.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that. We'll keep an eye on how this transpires over the coming weeks and months to come. Thank you very much, Councillor Alvantejo from City of Mississauga, for coming on to talk about this interesting municipal affair. I'll put it at that. So thank you very much.
Always happy to come on, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.